Welcome to the Wineskins YouTube channel. My name is Matt Dabbs. I am the editor of wineskins.org, and I've been bringing messages to you that I hope and pray are beneficial to your faith, to your ministry, to your walk with Jesus, and with your relationship with other Christians. I want to talk about a couple headwinds for our fellowship, Churches of Christ, that I think are significant in this video. And as always, I hope that you hear this as descriptive and not as criticism. I hope you hear it as constructive and not destructive. So the first trend that I want to talk about that I think is a headwind for Churches of Christ looking forward is the absence of brand loyalty. Brand loyalty is when someone sees a brand as something that's their thing. You think about Coke versus Pepsi. You think about Shell versus Conoco. You have your gas station, you have your restaurant, you have your soft drink of choice. People used to really feel that way about churches up until about 20, 30 years ago. There was a tremendous amount of brand loyalty. Anymore, as our society has become more consumer-driven, more consumer-focused, we have become accustomed to seeking out things that just meet our needs, that cross traditional, normal lines and labels. People are really not just jumping into the thing that they grew up with. They're open-minded to look at other things. And what that means is a headwind for us is that 30 years ago, you could have a Church of Christ in a metropolitan area, and if people moved into town who had grown up in Churches of Christ, they would try your church out. They would stop by. Now with smartphones, people are looking everywhere. They're able to preview services before they even go. Many of our churches are just now getting online with COVID-19. And it's important for us to realize that people don't have the same kind of brand loyalty that they used to have. And that means that we're not just going to get all the Church of Christ people who move into our community. They're going to look elsewhere and often go elsewhere. And again, they can preview services and see which one might best suit them or meet their needs before they even walk in the door. And if you're not providing that up front, which again, it's an innovative thing at this point in time that more of us are doing that now than we used to, which is a blessing. It's a good thing. But they may also see that and say, well, that's really not for me. They may not see anything and say, well, they're not thinking, yeah, that's not for me. It's very important for us to recognize that we're not just going to grow because people move into our town who are Church of Christ people from some other town. That's never been actually church growth anyway. That's not true kingdom growth. That's just transfer growth. It's really, really important for us to understand that the thing that we used to be able to rely on to keep us steady isn't there anymore. If that's one of the legs of our three-legged stool, we only have two legs left, and we're going to have to do a lot more balancing to keep things afloat. So that's the first thing. Our culture has shifted to a non-brand loyal approach, and that same kind of culture comes into how people assess church and religion and faith and where they're going to attend or not going to attend. And that affects then our ability to attract people and to retain people, because they're not just stuck on just being Church of Christ. They're looking for some place that's truly going to meet their needs and a place for them to get involved and to really be a part. When university students come out of our Christian universities and move into a town, often they're not going to go to a Church of Christ as they used to would have gone to. They're going to try out other churches, community churches, all manner of other kinds of churches. We can't rely on that kind of growth anymore. So that's the first thing. The second headwind that it really is one that affects our identity. The ministers who I talked to who are in their 60s, 70s, and beyond, they had a whole different type of training than those of us who got it in the last 15, 20, even 30 years. They were instructed by bivocational minister professors. So when you look at the faculty of our universities back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, those professors were preachers. They were ministers. They were preaching on Sunday in the church, and they were in the academy Monday through Friday. They were instructing in ministry. They were instructing in preaching. They were instructing in theology Monday through Friday, and they were back in the pulpit on Sunday. They had their foot in two worlds. And what has happened is, as our universities have kept up to speed with the typical kinds of things that they would need to keep up to speed with, like accreditation, they've needed an increased number in terminal degrees in order to maintain the kind of faculty that's going to take to have an accredited degree for someone to go out and be able to do things with that degree. It's common sense and it's practical. Here's what happens. So Church of Christ people who want to be professors, in order to be a professor then, have to get a terminal degree. They need a PhD in New Testament. They need a PhD in theology. So they're going to have to go off to some other university. But to get that terminal degree, to be able to meet the requirement to teach in our own universities, you're going to have to go outside of Church of Christ universities, because we don't have really PhDs that are offered so much in Church of Christ institutions. And what that means is, number one, the people who are more likely to do that are more open-minded. And second, the people who go through that experience are more likely to come out on the other end of that open-minded, because they're looking around at those who have taught them theology, who have taught them biblical interpretation, who've taught them Greek and Hebrew, and said, these are some pretty great spiritually minded spiritual giants. How on earth would I think that these people are not Christians? Those people come back to teach in Church of Christ institutions. And when they come back to teach in Church of Christ institutions, they're not just going to teach that same old line of tradition that they were taught and generations before them were taught, because they went out and got a degree from the best practices and the best people. What I'm saying is that now you have a generation of students who are coming up with professors who are trained outside of our fellowship, which again is not a bad thing. I'm not criticizing that. I think that's actually a good thing. But they're now being prepared in a way that does not necessarily prepare them well for Church of Christ congregations. Now, if you go to the Church of Christ job boards and you look at what they're asking for things like 3 to 5 years experience, married, and have a master's degree in theology from a brotherhood school, a Church of Christ school. But what that means now doesn't mean what it meant when our elders, who are now in their 60s, 70s, and 80s, knew what that was like in their younger days. Things have changed. So to get a degree from even a Church of Christ institution means that you're getting a degree based on professors who have gotten their degrees from other places. Again, this is not a criticism. I am so indebted to my theological education based on people like Dr. Rick Oster and Dr. Alan Black and Dr. Mark Powell and Dr. Bland, Dave Bland, and these people who are just incredible people who opened my mind up to see so many things with such clarity that I have. This is no criticism. I'm just observing the fact that it can leave someone in ministry unprepared for the reality of coming into the typical average Church of Christ congregation. When they've been trained with a certain theology, they've been trained maybe in new heavens and new earth, they've been trained in bodily resurrection, they've been trained in the new perspective on Paul, and on it goes, and they come back to a church that pretty much wants to be encouraged by the message, and they want things that are familiar. And in that pursuit of higher education, we are learning things that aren't familiar, and we're learning to be prophetic. We're learning to offer challenge. And so we're coming back into these congregations offering challenge, pushing for change, looking for new life, because they're struggling. And often those same churches are asking that person coming in to say, will you please rescue us, because we've been in a 15-year decline and we need someone to turn us around. And now on the church end, you have a setup for someone who is brand new, who has no rapport with the congregation, who has come in with a degree that's not necessarily theologically aligned with the congregation, to come in to save the day. But what it looks like for that young minister to save the day, and what it looks like from the churches and what they think is going to save the day, are two completely different things. And both are going to lean into their own inclinations. On the congregational end, they're going to say, well, to save the day means to get us back to gospel meetings, and it means to get us back to revivals, and it means to get us back to preaching the 5 steps, and it means to get us back to et cetera, the glory days. And the young minister never experienced any of that. They were born in, the year 1999, and that's all very foreign to them. And they're fine with instruments, and they're fine on women's roles, and they may even be a universalist when it comes to salvation. That's more and more prevalent. And here they are coming in being told to make sure to offer the invitation and preach the 5 steps, and inclusion's not really our thing. And so you see, it's a fit issue that people are being prepared for churches that don't exist. And if they do exist, they don't exist in our fellowship. Very, very rare. So we set ourselves up for, here's the real problem, is an identity issue. Are we a church of our history and heritage? Are we a church of the beliefs of our eldership? Are we a church of this new minister who has come in, who we're not theologically aligned with? Where is the church going? Who determines the direction? Who has been given the leadership roles and responsibilities? And often, really, the reality in our fellowship is the people who have the leadership roles and responsibilities don't have the messaging roles and responsibilities. And so we have this real conflict, not only between the academy and the congregation, but within the congregation, between the eldership and the minister, as they're just not on the same page. I don't entirely know what to do about that. And I'm not in favor of just saying, well, we only need to make sure that we have terminal degrees from Church of Christ universities and completely insulate ourselves from some best practices and best theology. I'm not game for that. At the same time, we have to be realistic about where our churches are at and what they truly need from a leadership perspective to move them into healthier perspectives and to maintain the perspectives that currently are healthy and biblical. Very difficult, very, very difficult work. This is why we need groups like the Cybert Institute out of ACU to consult churches and to work through this. They don't have an agenda. They're not trying to push you into a corner theologically. They're just trying to help you with where you are. I'll put a link to them in the description. I'm not being paid to say that. They have advertised on Wineskins, but they've not asked me to say this. This is just something I want to say. So that's a real problem, and it leads to some real theological identity crises in our fellowship. And it's something that we're going to have to really deal with looking ahead. And again, I don't know that I have answers to that. I need to think about that, pray about that a bit more, and maybe we'll come back on part 2 with exactly what do you do with that. And I also want to be very careful to say I'm not trying to alienate our institutions of higher learning. I'm incredibly indebted to them. And, again, I don't know completely what the answers are, and I'm not saying that all these things are even entirely problematic. I'm just saying that they lend themselves to some confusion when it comes to congregational life and theological identity. Here's the third headwind. The third headwind is a lack of good pneumatology. That means a lack of good understanding of the Holy Spirit. Now, we will always lack in our understanding of the Holy Spirit because the Holy Spirit, as Jesus says in John 3, blows where he will, and it's really hard to understand or predict the movement or ways of the Spirit. So here's why this is problematic. If the Holy Spirit is to convict us, inform us, and empower us, and we deny the work of the Spirit, we deny the role of the Spirit in the life of the church, and we're word only, that the Spirit only operates through the written text, the printed words on the page, then what that does is it means that we're only operating from our own knowledge. It means we're only operating from our own power. And it means that whatever convictions we have are only human-based, human-discerned convictions. And that means that we will have churches that are lacking power, that are lacking direction, and that are lacking good, solid theological identity. That is a huge, huge issue. Now, I do believe that issue is changing. I believe more congregations are coming around on that. But what we've done, in essence, is kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater to say, well, because there's a few fakes out there, we'll just completely reject and deny the work of the Spirit pretty much wholesale. And that is a foolish move. That's not a healthy move. It's not a good move. And we are struggling for a lack of a good understanding and reliance on the Spirit. Now, there's a huge key difference. Because again, I'm not just talking head knowledge. I can just say, well, we just need to understand the Spirit better. We have to rely on the Spirit. As if we don't rely on the Spirit, what we're trying to do will not work. It won't happen. Set lofty goals. Lean into the discernment of listening to the Spirit and what the Spirit is trying to get the church to understand and see and do. Be in prayer that the Spirit would help us discern our path, our direction, our theological identity. These are the kind of ways we lean into the Spirit. Rely on the Spirit. Ask God for the work of the Spirit to show us, to teach us, to move us, to empower us. If we're not doing that, if the leadership of the church is not doing that, the church will not do that. And if the leadership of the church is not doing that, the church isn't going to go anywhere. We're going to stagnate, and that's going to be such a major headwind, which should be a tailwind, right? The Holy Spirit should be a tailwind, but if you don't embrace the Spirit, the Spirit can be a real anchor to you moving forward because you're not moving in line with the will and the work of the Spirit. But my request for you is this. Here's the call to action. Be in prayer. The call to action is be in prayer. Asking God to humble us enough, and maybe this pandemic does it. If this pandemic cannot get our attention, I don't know any way for God to get our attention. Does God have your attention? Have you finally understood that you are not in control? You are not in charge. No matter how much it seemed like you were in 2019, you never were. You are not in 2020, and you were not in 2019. You were only fooling yourself. I was only fooling myself to get in a rut, to get in a rhythm, to get in a ritual, a routine. You know what? God is shaking us up. And we need to turn these headwinds into tailwinds. So thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button. Follow along. Share with a friend. Tell somebody about it. Tweet about it. Put it on social media. Go to the Facebook group, facebook.com/wineskins. There's 3,500 some odd followers on the page who comment and share input on these videos. And I would love for you to join the conversations here in the comments on this video. Give it a thumbs up. Share it again with somebody. And God bless. I'm so appreciative that you're watching this. And I'm appreciative that you're listening. I'm appreciative of the emails that I get, the texts that I get. You're welcome to text me at 334-750-9919. I love hearing from you. I get such encouraging, uplifting texts. I appreciate you. I want you to know that I'm thankful for you. And every time, again, a new person subscribes, when those numbers tick up, I just thank God for that every day. I thank God for it every day, because it means that there's a difference that's being made. And I don't claim to be an expert. I just want to get used. I just want to be a voice crying out in the wilderness, preparing the way of the Lord. And hopefully that's happening. So we'll see you next time.